who is wearing the big boy pants in our nation's capital at the moment? And what in the world is going on with the Washington Mystics offense at the moment? We've got our Mystics beat reporter, Jenn Hatfield, here with us. This is the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast, and we are tipping off now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
Good! You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Yes, hello, and welcome to the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast. This is Alex Simon, pinch hitting here on a quick little late change in the lineup for Howard Megdal, our usual Wednesday host. We're coming a little later on a Wednesday, but we still want to thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Locked On Women's Basketball is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use Locked On NBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Jenn Hatfield, our Washington Mystics beat reporter. We're coming a little late in part because there's a lot of Mystics news to break down. But before we even talk about the Mystics news, Jenn, you have given us an absolutely glorious story here on Wednesday. I want you to tell everybody what it was that you noticed in the first couple of games of the season that made this story so great when you were at the Mystics games.
Well, thanks, Alex. Always good to be on with you in this kind of after dark edition, at least out here in Mystics land. So the story I wrote today is about how Eric Thibault has settled in as the Mystics head coach this season after taking over for his father, Mike, in the offseason, and kind of how that transition has gone for Eric, for the players, for Mike, who is now not coaching and contending with that as he watches games. So really just a lot of watching what's been going on during games, watching practice, talking to players, talking to opposing coaches, and just trying to put that all together for folks and paint a picture of what this transition has been like, which has been, remarkably smooth. We never expected it to be bumpy, not with Eric having been on Mike's staff for so long and the players pretty much all knowing him. There's a lot of continuity on that roster from last year and even before that, but it's been very smooth overall. That's the main overarching thing I noticed.
There are some things that stay the same. I love the fact that one of the first things that you got as a quote is Eric kind of being like, I could still hear him yelling from his different seat. But with that different seat and then, not needing to worry about halftime adjustments or anything. I love the fact that, Mike can, get a halftime snack? What you noticed he went and got some munchies in between?
Yes, I'm pretty sure it's popcorn. It's a little bit hard to see from our media seats, but pretty sure he and his wife Nancy, they had these white small bags like you would have popcorn in. So they definitely got halftime snacks to keep them going with a 7 p.m. local tip.
I do find it interesting, and specifically to kind of hear a lot of the players saying that like it's not exactly the same. Right. I love Maisha Allen's quote about, well, one has glasses and one doesn't. One's young and one's old. But like so much of what I got the sense of is that it doesn't seem as if the Mystic players feel like this seat is in any way, shape, or form too big for Eric. And it should be noted that, he did get a few games of run as the fill-in head coach for his dad back during COVID absences. But there's a difference between filling in and doing the job. And it seems as if the players at least feel as if he's ready for it and is more than ready for it even.
Yeah, absolutely. They're super confident in Eric and they were even when he was interim, but especially as the permanent head coach. I asked several of them, has it been weird not hearing Mike? And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to Eric. I just mean that as you've had this guy who is a giant in WNBA coaching, who's been with the franchise for a decade, and now he's by and large keeping his mouth shut and letting Eric run things. Like, is there a little bit of a void there that you're not used to not hearing him? And for the most part, they all said no. Tiana Hawkins said, yeah, it's a little weird. She's been in Washington for ages, is very used to Mike. She goes, it's a little weird, but I like it. And pretty much the rest of the players said, no, it's not weird. Like, we're so used to Eric. Beyond Eric, coaching on an interim basis, he also has increasingly run practices and called plays and things like that during games. So he's kind of tried out a little bit of head coaching, kind of edged that way before he formally succeeded his dad. So it's been a very natural thing for all involved. It honestly may be hardest for Mike to kind of get used to that, but I don't know. Mike declined to speak at this time for my article, so I didn't get to pick his brain on how hard it is for him to just watch.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I love the photo that you took. It seemed like a screenshot off of Zoom of Eric wearing his dad's old team T-shirt. I'm sure it's not from that time and maybe is a custom order or some type, but it seems as if there's love in that way. But the idea that even Mike being able to go do something in the middle of the season, like go to a reunion for his old Omaha Racers, I mean, that's not possible if he's still the head coach. And I assume that, without getting a chance to speak to him, I'm sure there's a lot that Mike would have thought-wise, but does it seem to you that maybe that part of it is almost happening intentionally? The whole idea that Mike doesn't want to speak up too much to kind of let Eric truly take over. Is that your sense?
Very much so, yeah. And I think Natasha Cloud had a really beautiful quote on this. But yes, he's very much like giving up the reins. He's trying to be quiet. He made a deal with Eric that if Mike tried to get a coach's challenge called in the first half, that Mike would buy him coffee, which I read as Mike trying to not be too involved, right? And not trying to do his coaching things and let Eric try things and maybe mess up sometimes because that's natural. But yeah, and in practices, media are only allowed in the last bit of practice. And whenever I've been able to make it to practice, Mike's just sitting there, leaning back with his arms behind his head, his feet are outstretched. He's basically lounging in a chair on the side, just watching. And, but since we're only there for part of it, I wondered if that was really the case all the time. So I asked a couple players, does he say anything? Or is he just sitting there like that the whole practice? And they're like, no, that's what he does. He just watches. And, Maisha noted, she doesn't know what goes on when, upstairs in the offices, maybe Mike's providing more of his input there, but he's very much not quote unquote meddling in practices.
Yeah. Just quickly, because podcasting clearly a visual medium for those that listen to this audio only the way I like to. Jen did a demonstration of Mike kind of leaning back into his chair. Jen leaned back into her chair to do it. But right, you bring up a good point. Mike is still the general manager of the team. Eric is coaching the team on the floor, but Mike undoubtedly is involved. I'm sure there's plenty of conversations about the team as we get later into this season, and especially with the way Washington started the season, I'm sure we might get more of Mike's input, more so on the roster maybe than on the day-by-day playing on the floor. But before we kind of talk about some of those struggles, Jen, I want to talk about Gametime. I don't know how long you have known about the app Gametime, but for me, I've actually been a Gametime user for years. It is, to me, the best ticketing app that you can find anywhere on the internet. Gametime allows me, I can't tell you in how many cities I've been able to think, I want to go to a game here in Phoenix. Let's see what Gametime says. Oh, there's a great ticket. I got a 10% discount from Gametime. Let's go ahead and do this. And all of a sudden, 15 minutes after thinking I want to go to the game, I'm on my way to the game. Gametime's interface allows you to see where your seat's going to be. It allows you to see the price. It shows you the fees right away. I think Gametime, for my personal belief, as well as for what they do for Locked On, is the best app that you could do here. If you are interested and have not used Gametime before, you should download the Gametime app. It's available on all of your app stores today, and you can use the code LOCKEDONNBA for 20% off of your first purchase. $20 off, $20, not 20%. Gametime, it's truly incredible, and I would highly, highly recommend all of our listeners take a look if they haven't so far. Jen, as we look at this Mystics team, especially given the way that this season started with a absolutely dominant win over the New York Liberty, does it feel like there's frustration as to where they are now, a couple of weeks into the season?
I think the Mystics are trying to blend some perhaps natural frustration over being 3-3, just losing to the previously winless Minnesota Lynx. I think it's natural for there to be some frustration there, but I think they're blending that with kind of a long view. There's a sense of urgency, but also a sense of patience, right? This is a veteran team. They know that it's a long season, a longer than ever regular season this year. And so they're really invested in righting the ship, but they're not freaking out about it yet, if that makes sense.
And look, they're still 6 games in. They are at 3-3. This is a team that undoubtedly fancied itself as probably the third in a 2 super team world. You have reported about those thoughts plenty already in the run-up to the season. But they lost both games to the Connecticut Sun out of the start. And the Sun have kind of looked like that insurgent team into the super team conversation more. And I think most of the problems, Jen, you kind of would have to chalk up to offense, where they, as of right now, we're recording Wednesday as the game between Phoenix and Dallas is ongoing. But the Mystics have the fewest points per game of any team in the WNBA so far this season. And I assume that's not how they felt this was going to go for them.
No, they had a lot of continuity from last year. And so they expected, the top rated defense from last year would carry over, and it largely has. But they also expected they'd be able to, smooth things out offensively, especially with Elena Delle playing in every game. And that just hasn't happened yet. The shots have not fallen. Their field goal percentage is not pretty right now, especially from 3. And at some point, Eric has said this a fair amount, like at some point you just got to make shots. It doesn't matter how good your defense is in the WNBA, you got to score to win games. So they're working on that, trying to get that chemistry going, trying to get the right people in the right spots, get them hot, as they did with Ariel Atkins this past weekend. So that's one good sign. But yeah, it just hasn't looked fluid, or if it looks fluid for a little bit, then it falls off. They've given up a fair amount of runs. They'll go up by double digits and then they'll give it all back, which I think is a particularly frustrating part for them.
And I will say, in part, you can look at this statistically. They're one of only 2 teams in the WNBA that are shooting under 40% from the field overall. They're just barely ahead of the Seattle Storm, who are at 38.3%, but the Mystics are at 39.3%, so the second worst. They're also the only team under 30% from 3-point range so far to start the season, which is, as of now, 6 games in, 28.9%. I will quickly state the team at the other end of the 3-point shooting perspective, the Chicago Sky, for our every single day, here 6 days a week listeners, tune into the Locked On Women's Basketball podcast for our next episode when James Kay and Jackie Powell will discuss how good the Chicago Sky have been. That's coming to you tomorrow in your feeds. But today, Jen, when we talk about this Mystics team, could it just simply be that the shots aren't falling is the entirety of the offensive problems?
I think that's a large part of it, for sure. I think other factors that are kind of playing a role are just figuring out like who gets what shots when. Shakira Austin has been phenomenal this season. And that creates kind of a luxurious problem in that you need to balance like feeding her now with feeding everybody else. Last season, she basically never had a single play called for her and did well regardless. And now she's playing so well, they have to call plays for her. So that kind of scrambles like who your first option is. Your first option is always Elena Delle. But that scrambles who your second option, your third option. And so between Shakira and Elena playing so well, now it's, can you get the guards involved? Can you get them making shots? How do you fit Brittany Sykes in here? She's running a lot of point guard. She's going to look different in that role than Natasha Cloud. Can Natasha Cloud hit enough shots to stop people from going under screens? Same with Brittany Sykes. So there's just a lot of things like that to work out. And then, some of the bench players have not shot the ball well either to start this season. Shatori Walker-Kimbrough, Tiana Hawkins from 3. So just kind of getting them going too. So, and then they have talked about too, last year it was talked about a ton how the Mystics were last in pace. And that was a big thing that they talked to him in the offseason, running more, and they continue to talk about it, but they've been inconsistent as far as how many fast break points or points off turnovers they're getting in games. So they're not always, sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not getting the easy shots that kind of grease the wheels for the offense. And just even beyond getting easy points mentally, everything feels easier when you're getting a steady diet of like transition layups and plays that pump up your home crowd.
And especially you could see pace, they have a few stats where you look at just their totals in that regard. I do find it interesting. They're 10th in the WNBA. They only grab 6.2 offensive rebounds per game. And it might be because they do have inside presence players like Delle, especially, who tend to maybe float more outside. So offensive rebounds aren't there. But when you can't grab offensive rebounds and you play slow, it just means you just don't take a high volume of shots in that way. They're 10th in the league in field goal attempts per game. And I do find it interesting to note when you think about pace, the two teams that are worse than Washington in offensive rebounds, one of them's Phoenix, which we can let that one go. I do find it interesting that the Aces have fewer offensive rebounds per game, which allow for second chance points. But because of the pace, mostly the Aces shoot 3 shots more per game than the Mystics do. And I would think that if you look at a lot of the stats, the Mystics aren't turning the ball over. They get to the free throws. They're like in the middle of the league in terms of free throw attempts. And then obviously because they have Elena Delle, they're at the top of the league in free throw percentage. It's just that pace part doesn't give them as many opportunities to score if you're not getting offensive rebounds and you only have so many possessions. And then if those no offensive rebounds mean every possession is a one-shot possession, and then you're not making those shots, it certainly is not it's a recipe that could sink other teams to the bottom of the WNBA. And maybe that's more a sign of just how talented this team is, that with all of this going wrong, they're still only at 500 so far through this season.
Yeah, totally. As messy as the offense has looked in spurts, the defense has looked dominating in spurts. You mentioned how poor Washington's field goal percentage is at 39.3. Well, they're allowing opponents to shoot 39.9% from the field. So it's like they're making opposing teams look just about as rough as they have sometimes looked on offense. And that starts with the 3-headed monster of Natasha Cloud, Ariel Atkins, and Brittany Sykes on the perimeter, which, like, yikes, good luck. And then Shakira Austin's blocking shots in the paint if you get that far. So it's been fun to watch their defense at times, and it's they need to ride that, but they also need their offense to give their defense a little bit more of a break.
Well, after we quickly take a quick step aside for a commercial break, I want to talk all about Shakira Austin and kind of the front court that's become. And before we do that, though, we will need to talk about some interesting news that's happened even just on the practice court this week with the Mystics. So we'll be right back with that. Thank you all for making the Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Jenn Hatfield, we got a very strange kind of report from practice yesterday, and we should give a very large hat tip to Kareem Copeland of the Washington Post, who was there at practice. I know you wanted to be there, but just couldn't for other work obligations. But it seems as if there was a pretty scary moment with Maisha Allen, who has only just returned to the court at practice. Jen, does it seem as if the report of that happening on Tuesday maybe was as scary as it was Tuesday, but it hasn't seemed as serious the next day and the day after?
Yes, that's what the indications seem to be. And again, yes, credit Kareem for reporting yesterday as well as today. So for context, Maisha Allen had off-season knee surgery, missed the first 5 games, came back on Saturday to play 8 minutes. So she's played 8 minutes this season. Then the Mystics take Sunday and Monday off. So then in their first practice after she returns, very end of practice, she somehow got hit inadvertently very late in practice, took a hit to the neck shoulder area and went down. And it was scary enough that Eric Thibault called practice after that. He was like, we're done. So they were looking at her neck. They took her off gingerly and they were monitoring it. But she traveled with the team to Seattle today, and they'll keep looking at her tomorrow, but seems to be doing better. She was at practice today, but did not participate. So hopefully that's, just stiffness soreness that will go away naturally fairly quickly here, rather than a serious injury.
Certainly a scary situation, and especially for somebody that has been vital to what the Mystics have done in the past. I will say, though, we kind of saw this happen last year a little bit for Maisha Allen, that her role probably was going to be very different. Even just playing 8 minutes on Saturday is maybe a sign, because Austin has developed into I want to say, next level type star for this Mystics team. And when you look at her statistically, she's shooting 54%. It's on 9.8 attempts. So just like you were talking about earlier, she is blossomed into a player that you absolutely have to work to get shots for. She has more shots now than anybody but Elena Delle on this team. I don't think, Jen, if we had asked you that even a year ago in the middle of last season, we would have been saying, oh yeah, like everything, after Elena, your next best option kind of has to be Kira, right?
Correct. I would not have said that. I would have said Ariel Atkins. Now, Maisha is still on a minutes restriction. We don't know exactly how high or low that is. Eric won't tell us in case he goes over. He doesn't want to hear about it. But I do expect Maisha to play more as a backup option. But to your point, Maisha's role has been changing constantly. I wrote a really in-depth story on that last year, and how it was difficult for her to adjust to all these different roles, with Elena Delle sometimes playing and sometimes not, and Maisha playing with different post players who had different strengths. So this year, I think her role is a little bit more consistent in that she will be that backup post player. But yeah, she's being asked to be versatile. And Shakira Austin has really cemented herself in that starting lineup in the meantime, and someone who's going to be, a bona fide star in this league. Natasha Cloud, there was a funny moment on Saturday in the post-game press conference. This is after a loss to Minnesota, so it's not like it's a super jovial mood. But Natasha Cloud had previously posted on Instagram that she doesn't talk enough about how great it is to play with Shakira Austin. So I decided to ask her about that, and as soon as I say the name Shakira Austin, she leans forward and grabs the microphone with both hands. And kind of like, I'm ready, and so I asked her about Shakira Austin, and she says that's going to be the best center in the WNBA. She should be WNBA most improved player this year. Just gushes about her teammate, and it was really great to see that. And Shakira has been super impressive, really building on her strong rookie year. Plays really well with Delle, and just her teammates and coaches gush all the time about how smart she is in making reads off of other players. So like her success with Elena, she like instinctively knows where to go off of Elena Delle, which I don't think people realize how hard that is, because like Amanda Zawibi said this earlier in the preseason. She was like, I've never had a post player who wants me to come set up ball screen for them. Like, I don't know what to do. And Shakira has kind of instinctively known how to play with this post player who's not even really a post player.
Yeah, more of a Magic Johnson type in that regard, where you have somebody who is at a height that would make you a post player, but can handle the ball like a guard. And yes. Elena, there's a few players in the WNBA truly like that, Stewie, obviously. But when you look at, even statistically right now, you quickly look at, okay, well, Shakira so far this season is averaging 13.7 points a game and 9 rebounds a game. If you just use even 10 points a game, so who's getting double-digit points and 9 rebounds a game, there's only 7 players on the list. And in terms of people who have scored or grabbed more rebounds than her, the only people who have that combo are, Breanna Stewart, Satu Sabali, Neko Ogwumike, and Alyssa Thomas. That's pretty darn good company for Austin to be in her second year. It should be noted, only year 2. So I look and there was definitely some people who thought Mike Thibault was making maybe a mistake by letting Ryan Howard go, and she has been phenomenal, but I can't imagine Washington has any regrets whatsoever about the way they handled last year's draft when you see what Austin's done so far this year, especially, even though they probably would have felt the same way last year. It's only grown this season.
Yeah, I've never heard anything resembling regret about the draft. Mike has said he would have considered Shakira with the number 1 pick if they'd kept it. They could certainly use some of Ryan Howard's shooting right now, but Shakira has been incredible for them. So And I asked her just yesterday in post-practice media availability, I said, Kira, our team's guarding you differently this year with how well you've been playing. And she said, basically, yeah, a little bit, but they can't change it that much because Elena Deladon's next to me. So it's not again like a load up on Shakira Austin, at least not with the starters in the game.
And perhaps that's where we should end it too in that regard, because I mean, yeah, it is Elena Deladon just to her left. And so much of what this Washington team can do when you project what they could do going forward, as much as they've struggled in 6 games, we should keep making note, 6 games out of 40 this season. Mm-hmm. But for the struggles, if Elena Deladon plays at the level she's even been at so far, or even better, which is deeply in the MVP conversation, I mean, even with these super teams, Vegas looks like a world-beating monster, but this Washington team, if Elena Deladon's that good, it's kind of hard to see them not having a chance, right?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's only 6 games in. They got a lot of time to figure out this offense. And, one of Mike Thibault's favorite things to say is you don't worry about peaking right now. You want to peak going into the playoffs. And Elena Deladon has been simply spectacular. Like I can't overstate how ridiculous it is. And I wrote about this, how ridiculous it is, how well she's playing, given that she had 2 back surgeries and had stenosis, which is a condition that has forced professional athletes to retire. Like she had a deeply career-threatening back injury of all things. And she's coming back and in some ways playing better than she has in the past. And it's just, I mean, as Ariel Atkins said, who does that? Like, who does that? Elena Deladon does that.
She might really be one of the few ones who can be this good after several, not just one, but several career-altering injuries that otherwise might have, like you said, taken players' careers out. And for as much as, yes, they're 3-3 so far, the 3 losses include admittedly one that they would not love against the Lynx, though that was the back end of a back-to-back against a Minnesota team that was rested the night before, and then 2 against a very good Connecticut team. Jen, if we were to talk again come, let's say, their 2-game set that they have against the Chicago Sky coming up in about 10 days' time, in between then they have 2 games at the 1-4 Seattle Storm, 1 game at the 1-win Indiana Fever, and 1 game hosting the 1-game Phoenix Mercury. When we hit the 10-game mark, it wouldn't surprise anybody if what we feel like is a weird 3-3 start is 7-3 and rolling, would it?
No, I don't think it would be surprising. West Coast trips are hard for East Coast teams. Like that is a hard road trip, and I won't discount that. But, the Mystics should be favored in each of those games. And this is really a prime stretch for them to get that offense rolling. They're coming off of now a week of practice since the back-to-back last weekend, and they had a week of practice before that. So they've had some good practice time. Use this opportunity to, Elena Deladon said, today, like use this road trip to, do some team bonding as well. And hopefully that'll help on the court as well. So this is kind of the window for them to really, send a message. We're figuring this out. We got this.
And I'm sure, because I know these East Coast teams going west playing evening games can be difficult on a beat writer, that you are thrilled that Sunday is an afternoon game.
I am thrilled. Thank you, Sue Bird, jersey retirement ceremony, if that had anything to do with an earlier tip time.
Well, Jenn Hatfield, we hope that you can handle the 1 late game. Well, where can the people find your work deep into the East Coast evening, Friday night, and anytime they want Mystics coverage?
Yeah, so obviously check us all out at thenexthoops.com. And then I'm on Twitter at Jenn Hatfield1. That's Jen with 2 N's.
And Alex Simon Sports for me on Twitter. You can always check out what I do at Bay Area News Group. Thank you so much to Howard Megdal for letting me come in and slide a quick pinch hit appearance in for him here. You can listen tomorrow to the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast to hear Jackie Powell and James Kay breaking down the Chicago Sky, who have been, to some extent, the surprise of the season so far in the WNBA, rolling at 5-3, looking sharp, playing well, feeling fun. We want to thank you all for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day and hope that you come back and join us tomorrow. Thank you all and have a lovely Wednesday evening.
Ogunbowale for the win. Good!
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.